Welcome to Independent Aircraft Investigations. My name is Richard Godfrey. Today I am honored to be joined by Jeffrey Thomas, the host of Daily Airline News. Good evening, Jeffrey.
And good afternoon to you, Richard.
So today we're going to investigate MH370 and the withheld data. What data existed, what was withheld, the stated reasons for withholding, legitimate reasons perhaps for withholding, and where MH370 fits and where it doesn't. But before we get into that topic, we announced yesterday on Jeffrey's channel, Daily Airline News, that Ocean Infinity has suspended the search for MH370 for the time being. There has been no official announcement. Jeffrey, what are your thoughts on that action?
Yes, look, the decision by Ocean Infinity to pause its search for MH370 because of the severe weather is deeply disappointing, but it's also entirely understandable. Every interruption feels very heavy, particularly for those who still believe that answers lie within reach. When a search stops, even temporarily, the silence grows louder. That disappointment must be balanced with empathy for the crew at sea. The southern Indian Ocean is among the most unforgiving places on Earth, and no mission, however important, justifies placing lives in serious danger. The people operating these vessels are not expendable. They are skilled professionals working at the edge of what is physically and technically possible. For the families of MH370 passengers and crew, the pause is another painful chapter in an ordeal that has stretched across more than a decade. We're coming up to 12 years. Their resilience in the face of uncertainty remains extraordinary, and their need for answers has never faded. There is, however, reason for cautious hope. With improved conditions, the search may resume in March or April. Ocean Infinity's continued commitment deserves genuine praise, particularly its openness to investigating the Whisper identified area. Persistence matters, so does care. MH370 demands both, and neither has been abandoned.
Thank you for those thoughts, Jeffrey, and well said. I entirely agree with what you've just said. So now on to the topic for today, MH370 withheld data. Questions have been raised regarding potential detection by military radar and military satellite surveillance. Aviation news is covered on Daily Airline News as it happens every day. On this channel, once a week, we take a deep dive into what is happening behind the scenes. If you find this analysis useful, the perfect combination is to subscribe to both our channels. You will find the script of each episode, together with the illustrations used, as a downloadable PDF on my website, mh370search.com, under the tab Archive. In the previous episode, Signals Intelligence, we looked at the capability of Pine Gap and Diego Garcia. The conclusion was that the United States likely intercepted Inmarsat satellite data to and from MH370 and may have been aware, at least in broad terms, of the aircraft's possible flight path over the Indian Ocean. In episode 335 on Daily Airline News, the US Navy Boeing P-8 Poseidon aircraft were reportedly dispatched on a search and rescue mission from Diego Garcia on the 8th of March 2014, departing at 15:12 UTC. So, Jeffrey, the first question to you, Did the US already know where MH370 had crashed?
Well, it's a very good question, Richard. And while publicly there is no evidence that the United States knew, but clearly from the evidence that you have put together, it indicates that yes, they did know, and they knew broadly where to look, because we have tracked them essentially following MH370's flight path into the southern Indian Ocean. Within a 12-hour period of it being lost, they were following it. So I don't think there's any doubt that they knew, and it may well have been through their own intelligence or through the Inmarsat tracking data as well. So I don't think there's any doubt at all in my mind that they certainly knew something was up.
Yeah. So, in this episode, we'll examine who knew what and when, and who didn't tell what they knew. And Jeffrey, when you appear on television, they call you an expert on aviation, but you once said, the more I know about aviation, the more I know that I don't know.
Mm.
So that begs the question, how much do we know about MH370?
Well, that's a very good question, Richard. We know more than the public sometimes realises, but way less than we should. The Inmarsat data gives us a probable end of flight arc, not a precise location. We know the aircraft flew for hours after the last radar contact, but why, how, and under what control remain unresolved. Although there again we do have tantalising clues. Crucially, we don't have the full data picture, and that limits confidence in every conclusion that we might try and draw. So MH370, to my mind, remains one of the least transparent major aviation investigations in modern history.
Yeah, and it's been that way for 12 years almost. So
It sure has.
that's,
It's just extraordinary.
we're showing a screenshot of the MH370 data, and some of that data is available, and some has even been made public. Some of that data has only been partially released, and some has been withheld entirely. And the list is quite long. There are over 40 categories of data that could be helpful in understanding the crash location and understanding who was at the controls and understanding the motivation for the diversion. So, Jeffrey, what do you think? Is it right? Is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it consistent with investigative best practice in a civil aviation accident investigation to withhold data?
Well, it's a loaded question, Richard. Look, yes, I guess sometimes, but only under narrow, clearly defined conditions. Withholding can be legal and ethical when it protects sources, methods, or genuine national security interests. However, in my view, blanket or indefinite withholding in a civil aviation investigation is deeply problematical. Best practice demands maximum disclosure with reduction rather than silence wherever possible. The issue is not that some data was withheld, it's how much, by whom, and for how long. And as we have found, and more to the point, as you have found, the list is very, very long and deeply, deeply troubling. And it seems just extraordinary in this day and age that so much data is withheld, and in such a painful case that begs discovery, and every single piece of data we can get our hands on can change the mathematics, can change the calculations, can change the assumptions. So, we really do need that data. We need it urgently.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And MH370 passed within range of the military radar of Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, India, and Australia. So, a lot of countries with a lot of data potentially. And if releasing information, of course, if it unveils how that information was acquired, then it will not be released. Then that's understandable. But it is possible to sanitize the data so that it can be released, at least not publicly, but to the civilian authorities who are searching. Military radar data and surveillance data has been withheld. We are
Mm.
showing a screenshot of the radar coverage from Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia over the Malacca Strait. And quite clearly, MH370 must have flown through that radar system.
Mm.
So it begs the question, Jeffrey, what comes first, aviation safety or national security?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I want to digress slightly here, Richard. I want to go back to when I was the Southeast Asian editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology between 1997 and 2000. And it was my role, as well as covering civil aviation and space, which I know very little about space, and I also had to cover military aviation. And I had a constant battle with my US editors who said to me, I want you to interview the head of the Thai Air Force or the Malaysian Air Force or the Indonesian Air Force and get a sense of their radar capabilities or this capability or that capability. It was a wall of silence, the cone of silence, the wall of silence, whatever you like. It was just impossible to extract any information from those countries about their military defense posture, their radar capabilities, or anything at all. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we can't get any data out of them whatsoever. Whereas in the United States, you can sort of file a freedom of information and you can get, a huge amount of data from the various authorities there. But, getting back to the question, in principle, aviation safety should come first. Lives depend on the lessons learned. And in practice, national security often overrides transparency, especially when military capabilities are involved. And as per my earlier point, the real test is the proportionality. Does withholding actually protect security, or does it simply avoid embarrassment or exposure? And on that case, when the search for MH370 moved into the Andaman Sea, China requested permission for its aircraft to search. Now, that was denied by India because the issue was the Indians didn't want to reveal their capabilities of their radar to the Chinese. So in MH370's case, the balance appears to have tilted too far towards secrecy, and safety suffers when critical data is excluded from independent scrutiny. So this wall of silence, this cone of silence, has got to come down for this particular tragedy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And moving on to the satellite data, and using only open source orbital longitudes for the three Pine Gap controlled Orion geosynchronous SIGINT satellites from the US. The region which we're looking at is bounded by 90 to 100 degrees east and from 10 degrees north to 40 degrees south. That's where we're pretty sure MH370 flew. And that lies well within the line of sight of these three Orion satellites.
Mm.
That establishes, of course, a geometric feasibility only. It does not demonstrate that any signal from MH370 was intercepted and recorded and processed or retained by any of the satellite systems. We do know about the Inmarsat satellite, but it would be interesting to know about the three US satellites. And
Mm.
beyond the Inmarsat reception, confirmation, of course, would require access to classified collection, tasking, and payload performance data. So the US president actually has the authority to release any data that may be held on MH370 if such is available, at least to the investigation authorities. And what do you think about that idea, Jeffrey?
Well, I think absolutely. If relevant data exists and can materially assist the investigation, yes, it should be released. Release does not mean public dumping. It can be done to accredited investigators under safeguards. Authorisation would signal that the truth and safety outweigh institutional discomfort. Even confirmation that no usable data exists would itself be valuable. And the trouble is, silence fuels speculation, and we've had so much speculation. Whereas controlled disclosure restores some sort of credibility in the investigation. So, I think it's absolutely essential that if the US does have information relevant to MH370, it should release it. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. That would be a very good move for
Mm.
MH370 investigation. Now, I live in Germany, and we had a case in Germany with the German wings crash where Andreas Lubitz, the co-pilot, had visited several doctors, and they were under privacy laws not allowed to divulge their concerns about whether he was fit to pilot a commercial aircraft. And they relied solely on him as an individual calling in to his employers that he was sick. Raised a lot of questions in Germany about should a doctor respect the privacy of his patient diagnosis and treatment, or should the pilots have a support program available where they are actually encouraged and rewarded for reporting issues like this,
Mm.
rather than at the moment they're simply punished by their license being taken away and their livelihood being taken away from them. What do you think is the best way forward on this issue, Jeffrey?
Look, this opens a Pandora's box. It's a huge issue in the aviation industry. Now, absolute medical privacy works until it collides with public safety. And interestingly enough, and I digress just slightly here, we've had a mass murder attack, not the very recent one on the beaches of Bondi in Australia, but this was a shopping centre in Bondi in Sydney a year ago or so, and a gentleman stabbed about six people, I think, and murdered six people, and about another 15 or so, as others were injured, severely injured. Now, the coroner has just handed down her findings today, and she found that the psychiatrist that was looking after this particular gentleman who perpetrated this crime, she's been severely criticised for not alerting authorities and not caring for him, in a more meaningful way. And the signs were there that he was going to go off the rails. Absolutely. So it's an interesting sort of a situation. Now, getting back to what we're talking about, the problem for pilots is that if they say that they're an alcoholic or they have a medical issue, as you rightly say, Richard, they are then struck off, lose their jobs, lose their livelihood. So unless you can guarantee them privacy with their medical practitioner, they're not going to report the problem. So, as you suggested, the airlines have got to have a far more meaningful and secure way of looking after their pilot cohort. And pilots should have a non-punitive support pathway that encourages early disclosure. And as I said, the issue is it'll wipe out a pilot's career if they're deemed to be medically unfit. Now, this concerns me very greatly because pilots today are in a far more stressful situation with tighter turnarounds, more crowded airspace, increased turbulence. It's not the glossy job it used to be. It's a far more stressful job than it's ever been. And their salaries, for most of them, are not the glamorous salaries they used to get compared to everybody else. So it's not as well paid for most that it used to be. And what I term the race to the bottom by airlines has gone too far. Now, air travel's incredibly cheap compared to average weekly earnings. When the first 747 came out in 1970, it cost the equivalent of 15 weeks' salary to fly from the UK to Australia and return. 15 weeks' salary. Now it's 1 week's salary. Yet people still clamour for cheaper flights. Now, of course, when they're clamouring for cheaper flights, that puts pressure on airlines to cut costs. And I think the cost cutting has gone too far. Now, separately, doctors should not be forced into policing roles, but systems must exist beyond silence. And safety improves when reporting is supported, not punished. Now, just digressing away from that as well, good airlines have a non-punitive reporting system for incidents in the air where a pilot does something wrong. I push this button instead of that button. And they have a non-punitive reporting system. The good ones do. I think most do. And that's the sort of thing we've got to support because the wider issue is the safety of passengers. We're not talking about one or two people here. We're talking 300 or 400 people. So it's a
Yeah.
very vexing issue and requires a lot more thought.
I think you make a very good point. And realistically, if we want safe aviation and we want to introduce, for example, pilot support programs, so early disclosure of a personal issue or health problem is encouraged, that's going to
Mm,
cost money for the
mm,
airlines. And it's going to
yep,
put flying costs up for the general public. And we're
yep.
going to have to be willing to pay more for an air ticket in order to ensure the system remains safe. So you make a very good point there.
I I know a pilot who was supposed to fly one of the flights on 9/11, and he's not directly related to me, but I know him through a colleague. And he was called out the night before and didn't fly that particular flight. The feeling of guilt and the horror of the whole thing, he became an alcoholic. But the airline concerned took him under their wing, so to speak, and basically pulled him offline, obviously, for about 2.5 years and got him fixed, got him back, and eventually got back to flying again, but supported him for over 2.5 years through that situation. And that's the sort of thing we need. And as a flying passenger, I'm very, very happy to pay the cost.
Yeah, well said.
Mm,
Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a fascinating conversation and hearing your views. And
pleasure.
I look forward to
Mm,
joining you on your
yes,
channel.
yes.
Uh,
I think you're going to join me on Sunday.
indeed.
And
So,
I'm not wearing all these bandages anymore.
yeah, it was great what you were saying in your episode earlier that the results are all good. So,
Mm,
very pleased to hear that.
yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
So, viewers, in the next episode on this channel, Friday, the 13th of February, and I hope you're not superstitious, we'll be looking at the acoustic hydrophone data that is available to help narrow down the crash location of MH370. And as always, please leave any comments or questions you may have, and we will address the key points in the next episode or publish responses on YouTube or on our website, mh370search.com. So thank you very much for watching, and thank you again, Jeffrey, for joining us. And if you haven't already subscribed to both our channels, then please join us on both Daily Airline News and Independent Aircraft Investigations. Stay safe. Have a good day.